Thank you, John, for that introduction. Honorable Anand Sharma ji, Shashi, distinguished guests who all joined us for this workshop, ladies and gentlemen. In Delhi, the answer to the question, do you smoke, always is, I no longer need to, I live in New Delhi. And, it's whenever you find two people discussing the weather with each other, you presume they are British, because British people discuss the weather. In New Delhi, people discuss, you recognize them because they discuss air quality, they discuss how bad the pollution is all the time. But the good part of it is, I think I'm an optimist, the good part of this all has been that today the focus of attention has shifted. The mind space occupied by clean air among citizens, amongst concerned people, even amongst individuals within the government, has more and more shifted to this whole question of how important air quality is, how important the air we breathe in is to our daily lives. The judiciary in particular had been actually quite active since 2000, 2001. That was the time I first came to New Delhi, in getting concerned about Delhi's right to breathe clean air. And so the whole process started of shifting over to cleaner fuels, the CNG experiments, then the BS4, and then the BS6 standards, which in 2020 will start kicking in for the rest of the country. But however, in spite of all this, Delhi's air still remains quite unbreathable. But let me move beyond Delhi. Delhi's air has been fairly obstinate. But as per WHO data, the latest I could get hold of was what they had collected till about 2016. 6 of the world's most polluted cities are in India. But the list is not actually topped by Delhi, as many would have us believe. The gold medal in this goes to Gwalior, and the silver goes to Allahabad. So the phenomenon of bad air is actually something which is, it is great that we discuss it in NCR, it is very much in the mind space of everybody, but it is far wider than just the National Capital Region. And if you think about it in those terms, there are 3 important things. First of all, air pollution related costs already account for 3 to 8% of the Indian GDP, depending on which analysts you are using. But this number does not, however, take into account the costs of exposing the young, the unborn, fetuses still in their mother's womb, to the kind of air quality which they're breathing. We keep talking about India's demographic dividend, the great opportunity that awaits us, the engine of India's growth. But the fact is that the primary, secondary, and tertiary effects of air pollution at these stages could end up raising our healthcare costs by as much as, again, wide variation estimates from 3% to 33% by 2060. Second, and which is much worse, the effects of air pollution are iniquitous. It doesn't affect everyone equally. The effect is grossly selective. There's a discrimination there also. There are very insidious divides. It is, of course, said that India has some of the most toxic cities in the world. We've already spoken about that. But the fact is that it is overwhelmingly the rural population which suffers. If air pollution leads to the early mortality of approximately 1 million Indians per year, the bulk, 75% of them, are from rural India. And 60% of these, 60% of that 1 million are actually women. So there is on grounds of gender, on grounds of geographical distribution, urban, rural, it is skewed. Third point, while ambient air pollution and its consequence to human health are fairly well documented. People have been writing about it, talking about it. Pollution does not stop here. It also disrupts agricultural cycles. Studies in certain areas have ascribed as high as a 50% loss in wheat output due to high concentration of short-lived climate pollutants. And we are yet to document the correlation between bad air quality and the migratory cycles of birds and animals, as well as its impact on the larger ecosystem. And these are long-term impacts which need to be studied, which need to be put on the table when we start talking about ambient air quality. The villains, yes, industrial emission, transportation, open biomass burning, coal-based power plants, I mean, they are identified, they are the sources. And as has happened in all countries, with GDP galloping, pollution has also galloped. That has happened in India, that has happened in China. However, while coal-based power plants have been the primary sources of ambient air pollution over Chinese cities, biomass burning still remains the major cause of air pollution in India. And that itself speaks volumes for where India stands in its growth trajectory today. So the shift to modern cooking fuels, such as LPG, electricity, clean energy forms, for a country like this has to be an article of faith. The only argument is whether we can do it fast enough. In this aspect, schemes to provide the push of LPG into rural areas is definitely something which we keep talking about. That is a positive. But a challenge still is to ensure that LPG as well as electricity in these areas, for poor rural households especially, can become a commodity which is on demand. And we are very far from that. Access is still extremely limited. So initiatives like this eventually are the ones which are going to have a direct impact on health, livelihoods, poverty alleviation, and ultimately move us much closer to attaining the Sustainable Development Goals. And as you all know, India has a ranking of 58.1 as far as the score goes in the index, in the SDG index. And it ranks lowly 116 out of 157 nations that were included in these rankings. And for the whole world, India is the elephant. India is the important one, because if India attains its Sustainable Development Goals, then the world attains 25 to 30% of its targets. So the Sustainable Development Goals for the next few years stand or fall by India, are made or marred by what happens in India. And therefore, India cannot afford to fail in this. So over the course of this workshop, the policy debate in India, the debate about Indian air quality will be discussed at great length. I think we need to confront this in terms of three of the country's defining factors. The first, of course, is the accelerated pace of urbanization and industrialization. As India tries to play catch-up with the developed world, that is the first thing. Second is, it is still a country with a burgeoning population, which will become the world's most populated nation by 2024. And it will remain the most populated nation right through the 21st century. One half of this population is going to be young. And there is the one big challenge of keeping this population meaningfully and productively engaged. Then there is the other one of ensuring sustainable development for 300 million, for whom, if we don't do it, the 21st century is just going to pole vault over them. So whether it is the quality of urban infrastructure we talk about, transport, clean energy options, the need for capital for these initiatives cannot be wished away. On the one hand, you have situations where countries are struggling to raise infrastructure finance. On the other hand, private capital, pension funds command resources that dwarf the planning budgets available with most governments. Now, these are anomalies which need to be corrected. And action in many of these areas cannot and should not be left to the governments alone. We need to create ways to incentivize private capital, both domestically and internationally. to provide a massive non-governmental push to these efforts, create policy structures that help incubate bankable projects to unlock private investments in these areas. And it is with the intention of finding solutions to development problems, to similar problems, through private capital that we at ORF have, with the support of partners such as the MacArthur Foundation, GIZ, DFID, we've launched a Financing Green Alternatives program, and this is also part of that initiative. This project focuses on ways to help private capital flow towards sustainable infrastructure projects. And we are now working on ways to expand this project to incorporate some of the other SDGs as well. So all I will say is that ORF as a think tank remains fully committed to these tasks, and I hope that the sessions that follow in this workshop will give us enough material for thought as well as for action. And with this, I'll hand it back to Aparajit to take the rest of the evening forward. Thank you.
Sanjay Joshi, the chairman of ORF, my colleague and friend Shashi Tharoor, my fellow members of Parliament who are present here, Dr. Sanjay Singh, Pradeep Bhattacharya and Vincent Pala, distinguished guests and friends. When I was invited by Jaiveer, I was wondering whether we'll be in a position to make it, considering that the Parliament, when it functions, can keep you engaged and can be turbulent or can be very absorbing, both. Fortunately, it's working, and we both, me and Shashi, he had another commitment. I too had the same, but I didn't go there, and I decided to be here with you. I was listening very carefully to Sanjay when he was talking about the initiative, the significance, the challenges, and the work that you're doing. It's a complex issue. But when we talk of safe air, the pollution as such, the factors that lead to pollution, and how societies, institutions, both public and private, experts, scientists, biotechnologists, environmentalists, they are addressing this. It's very important for those who are working in this field to understand the complexities or the multiple challenges that are involved and how to address the same. Not one or the two in isolation, but to have a coordinated approach which can give some results which we all yearn for. It's true that India is a major developing country. It has developmental needs, infrastructure development, and also aspirations as a nation, whether it's India or China. It's not a question of how much we contribute. It's a question of how others who have become rich have contributed. When it comes to the greenhouse gas emissions, when it comes to the gaping holes that have been created, and how to have a balance for a country like India to address these issues without diluting or compromising is developmental pursuit or developmental agenda. And that's why sustainable development goals is not what is SDGs, what were adopted at the United Nations at the turn of the century. We are far from meeting them. Or what was discussed and agreed upon and then later disagreed by some, particularly America, what was agreed in Paris. I'm not getting into that. The fact is that there are many reasons for air pollution, as Sanjay was saying, whether it's the vehicular pollution, the emissions, construction, dust. Dust is a major factor in India, open burning, both in the suburbs, even in the metros, and in the villages of the country. The biomass burning, inadequate facilities or weak investment, low investment when it comes to waste disposal, garbage disposal. These are some of the factors. When we talk of National Capital Region of Delhi, it's not the city of Delhi alone. It embraces the states of Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, Punjab. So it's not that NCR is something small, it's huge. Last year, there were two phenomena around the 7th, 8th of November, 2017, when Delhi was choking. But not only Delhi, the entire NCR region, well beyond Mathura, well beyond Panipat. It was impossible to step out or to breathe. The question arose whether it was only the air pollution or something beyond that. Yes, it was beyond that. Stubble burning and the winds was not the only cause. Another major factor was the sudden disturbances over Iraq and Syria, which created a big dust storm which was unprecedented. And we were told by experts, by meteorologists, that they had not seen anything like that for almost a century, what happened in that week. So it was a challenge. You are not prepared for these situations, but stubble burning is something, of course, you will be prepared. You can be prepared. But we have to put things in perspective. My committee took cognizance of all this, and we immediately engaged with the institutions and the experts. This has been an ongoing intense exercise since the first week of December last year. And in few weeks we'll be ready, not few weeks, few days, to finalize the report and the recommendations and give it to the Parliament. But the stubble burning as such, I would like to touch upon, is because of the farm economy, particularly the states where farmers have to sow 2 crops. And soon after the paddy, they have to go for kharif sowing and they have to clear the fields. It takes time, it takes money. And it's not a small amount of money. We look at the farm economy and what the farmers are making, whether they are getting remunerative prices for what they produce, there won't be any agricultural distress in India. We won't be seeing farmers' suicides or the protests. Therefore, the states as such, whether it's the union government or the state governments, are required to pool their resources, bring together the institutional strengths to assist the farmers to deal with this issue. And I was happy to see that's happening. This year, it may be much less than what we saw last year. Whether it's stubble burning, you can't have punitive measures that we will impose a fine. The farmer is struggling, you say that I'll take you to jail. Then you are not being humane in your approach and correct in your approach. You can't threaten. You have to find solutions. And that's what I feel is our collective duty that we should do. So whether these are the agricultural universities, the agricultural scientists, or those who are in the energy field, they have worked together to find a solution. It's not only giving money to the farmers, but to have scientific solutions. And some of those solutions have been found, particularly making available the seeding machines, the happy cedar as they call it. The Agriculture University in Ludhiana has developed it. This has been replicated. Farmers are being made available free of cost, these machines, so that they don't have to remove the stubble, they don't have to burn it. NTPC has stepped in. Sanjay, you were talking about the thermal plants. Thermal plants are there to remain. I have been reading about them. That unfortunately in India too, instead of bringing down the consumption or the burning of coal for producing power, we are well behind targets when it comes to the renewable energy generation or power production. And in the coming decades, in fact, the thermal power plants will be producing more electricity than whether solar or the wind power, or for that matter, energy coming from other renewable sources, including the nuclear energy. That's a fact. So how do you have technologies which are mitigating, which ensure that your air does not get polluted the way it has been because of the big power plants or thermal power plants in the major cities? Delhi has shut down. Many other cities are shutting down. But that's not the solution. If they are not in Badarpur, they'll be 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers away, but they will be there. So the technologies which are being used now are helpful. You cannot, as I said, wish away. But the new technologies which are controlling that pollution or the emissions which are there. Same is the case with the vehicular thing. I met a very prominent expert, well-known name. We had called people or experts before the committee. And the straight attack was on the diesel vehicles, that they have to be banned. So I was a bit taken aback. And nowhere in the world that has happened. You move forward when it comes to the fuel standards. And India has already decided to take the leap, given the pollution, from BS4 to BS6 straight away. How much that will help, time will tell. But it's not only one area or two areas. It's all the issues have to be addressed together. But the good thing is that there is awareness. And that awareness has caught up within the society, through the mass media, educational institutions, our youth, our children. People are aware that there is need to make an effort, a national effort, to check air pollution, which leads to so many diseases. The economic costs, as Sanjay was mentioning, are huge. You cannot calculate how many people fall sick, how many people die, what are the costs for treatment, whether it's the pulmonary respiratory diseases, stroke, cancer, heart diseases, you name it, and they're connected somewhere with what you breathe. And it's the children and the old who are the worst affected, and which is understandable. But I was happy to observe that the kind of work which is going on in India, perhaps many people are not even aware of. Today, you can drive around the city. It's not that you'll breathe good air, but you will know what is the particulate content, what is the air quality index. Those systems have been put in place throughout the country. The monitoring systems, alert systems, and that has been a national initiative. It's not only the Indian Meteorology Department. It's right from ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, which is very closely involved in monitoring the aerosol movements, along with the Indian Institute of Remote Sensing in Dehradun. through satellite systems, the aerosol movements on the entire Indo-Gangetic belt. So they are doing it. Then you have that Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, where the SAFAR is housed. There's the Safe Air and Weather Forecasting Systems. There's dedicated satellite system, the Pratyush. And they're trying to find solutions. There's an army of scientists, biotechnologists, space scientists, researchers in different parts of the country who are working on it. So we are not happy. None of us will be as Indians when the WHO report comes that how many of our cities are polluted if there are 14 out of 20 on the annual basis. Because there have been cities elsewhere which have been more polluted. And those countries have been able to invest their resources, technologies, to mitigate and to address those challenges. We have to have the will and the determination and the effort, as I said, a combined effort, collective effort, to achieve the same. What I have learned that given the direction in which various institutions are moving and so many dedicated scientists who are working, we will be able to address this challenge to a large extent sooner than what many people or experts think. I wanted to share this with you so that there is no despondency, seeing that we are not doing anything. We are not going to solve it in this one room here in the hotel or through this, but this is a commendable initiative which has to be supported. But on a larger issue, we have to be pragmatic and realistic. Particularly about countries, it's a fact that we are a country of 1.3 billion people, and it's a fact that China is 1.4, moving towards maybe 1.5 billion. It's also a fact that we are major developing economies. And whoever is there, the policymakers, the planners, the governments, in a democracy, or even for China, they have to continue to invest and redistribute whatever resources they create or the wealth they create, overall for the development and for common good. So we cannot compromise our economic development. That path certainly is not available. That option is not available and will never be available and should never be available. And that applies to all the poor countries, be in Asia, Africa, or South Americas, because they have been historically discriminated against and unempowered. You cannot tell the poor that you have no right to aspire where others have reached. You have to ensure that they reach it, and there is a harmonious balance that is created between development, which is sustainable, and environment. If you don't create that, there cannot be any development. And that balance will be the primary responsibility of all those who will be engaging in the, I was just overhearing briefly that the Niti Aayog will come. It used to be the Planning Commission, but I hope they are doing good work. Many of the officers who are there, they have worked with me, and they are good, they have bright minds. Surely they'll do, including Amitabh. He worked with me for long years. So I'm sure that they would be thinking about it. But it's not one individual, one organization, one government which alone would deliver. It has to be, as I said, the combined effort, what you deliberate, what you make your recommendations. Surely we in Parliament will also would like to know about that, we'll read about it. And what you propose to do. as outreach. Everybody has to be prepared to supplement, whether it's big or small, and not to sit in judgment. As I said, whether India or China, our two countries perhaps have the capacity to assimilate technologies which are mitigating, to innovate, to develop, and to introduce new solutions. We have that ability in our institutions, and to borrow the best, what is available. But there are countries which do not have the resources. Human resources have to be, you have to make that investment in preparing those human resources, training them, sharing of the technologies. You cannot have this, then the patents coming in this discussion or debate. If you are talking of humanity, if you're talking of planet Earth, then that has to be dropped. And the developed countries and the countries which develop new technologies should be willing to share with the poor countries. It's a larger issue I'm touching upon, not confining it to India. It's not only economically or technologically that the world is interconnected and interdependent. Planet Earth as such is. Oceans don't separate, don't divide. If something is happening in, say, Arctics or the Greenland, it's going to affect all of us. So we cannot say that, oh, this is happening in Rwanda or Burundi, let it be. Countries should be prepared. It's a larger issue. As I started when I said the last November's phenomena was not local, was not Delhi, was not NCR, was not Indian, but was regional. Similarly, such regional developments would be taking place elsewhere. So you have to look at the larger picture. And for India too, we have to look beyond our borders or the geographical boundaries of India. For that matter, the countries of South Asia have to pull in their resources. If some developments are taking place in Bangladesh or Nepal, it would be wrong on our part to assume that we are not going to be directly impacted and adversely affected. It will help affect us. So I hope that such initiative, Shashi, will create more and more awareness, will help us to prepare, and the stakeholders in the society will recognize the seriousness of the challenge, the enormity of the task, and work. Parliamentarians surely have a major role. Normally, I tell you, I have met all my life, and you two must be meeting and our other colleagues. The senior most being Pradeep Da, who's sitting there, was a cabinet minister in Bengal government in 70s. So this impression, also if I may say so, not that I have come here before a jury, that this, I find it rather strange, but this is persisting. And it's trendy, it's fashionable to think that those who sit in Parliament know nothing. Actually, you look at the social media, you look at the TV channels, those who are actually themselves half literate or quarter literate are questioning the collective wisdom of the elected representatives. I find that disgusting. Work with Shashi, work with these bright colleagues of mine who are sitting there. Jose has joined us just now. Then you'll realize, Gaurav is there, that we are as much concerned, and together, it's not we, it's not a parliament or a government, but as a society, as a community, as people, and as a nation, we have to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sunjoy Joshi, Chairman of ORF, my good friend and colleague, Sri Anand Sharma, Member of Parliament, Chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on the Environment, my fellow members of Parliament, Professor Pradeep Bhattacharya, Sanjay Singh, Vincent Pala, Gaurav Gogoi, Joske Mani, Gurjit Singh Aujla, N.K. Premachandran. This is an order of appearance. I don't know if I've left anybody out, but in any case, all of you and distinguished participants in the roundtable. Good evening. Delighted to add my voice of welcome to this formal opening ceremony of the second roundtable consultation on framing a national plan on deteriorating air quality. This is indeed a special occasion for me, since this is a topic that I started this roundtable on last year. It's one that's very close to my heart, or more precisely, perhaps more close to my lungs. As some of you may be aware, exactly 1 year ago, bothered by this critical issue, I brought together a group of civil society stakeholders, healthcare experts and practitioners, some technical experts, doctors, a few fellow parliamentarians, to a closed-door discussion on the magnitude of the current crisis of toxic air quality in India. The discussions dealt not only with the current state of air quality, but also extended to the deliberations on what we could possibly do as concerned citizens and elected representatives to help create a national action plan to address this issue. My thinking was we needed to do this before the inevitable air crisis would come with Diwali in November, when again the headlines would be there, everybody would be choking, everyone would talk about it, and then promptly they'd forget about the whole issue again till the following November. I said, let's take it up when we have the time to think and discuss it. I have to admit it didn't work terribly well. The government was largely conspicuous by its absence, and because precisely there was no sense of urgency at that time, exactly a year ago, last July, nothing really happened by way of follow-up. We did write to the Environment Ministry at that time with what we had come out with, and we got, largely speaking, a pro forma reply, and I hope I'm not being unfair in saying this. But this year, for the second edition of the Roundtable, I was delighted when my good friends Sunjoy, Joshi and Samir Saran, the president of ORF, who unfortunately couldn't join us this evening. And ORF, I will say in front of Sunjoy, whom I've known for some years now, is arguably India's most robust and industrious think tank. They have a wide range of issues they spend time on and focus on seriously, and it's delightful to partner with them on this issue. And then my friend Shazia Rafi, convener of Air Quality Asia, which is a Washington-based parliamentary air quality advocacy group, graciously offered to jointly sponsor preparations for the second roundtable so we could do it at a more ambitious scale than I was able to afford to do at this time last year. I'm glad to see and note that through their networks we've managed to bring together an impressive multi-stakeholder group this evening, some of whom are familiar faces from my previous interactions on the subject, but some of whom are new to this forum. And I do want to really place on record my sincere appreciation for the teams of both organizations, ORF and Air Quality Asia, that have come together to make today's and tomorrow's deliberations possible, especially John Koshi, who has already addressed you this evening and who spent an enormous amount of time in preparing what I think will be a very fruitful meeting over the next day and a half. On this subject, I should say that the subject of deteriorating air quality was also discussed in some length by the Delhi chapter of the All India Professionals Congress, of which I am the chairman, and they released their own white paper in December 2017. I had the privilege of presenting it to the press, and the paper had focused on the situation in Delhi in particular and advocated certain short-term and long-term interventions to address this issue. So we have some work there. We're not pretending that there isn't already work on these issues. Of course there is, but we need to pull it all together into a coherent and focused and actionable plan to clear up the air of our country. And I must say the Delhi AIPC effort was one of the earliest policy initiatives of the All India Professionals Congress, which was less than 6 months old at the time. And I'm happy to see that some of the architects of that report are also in the room this evening. Now, admittedly, the subject of deteriorating air quality has not become yet a a sort of headline discussion other than that period just around Diwali in terms of shaking up the national consciousness. While all of us who've gathered this evening have been concerned by this complex and challenging reality and may have spent the better part of our professional careers working to reverse the situation that we find ourselves in today, the larger concerns of air quality have failed to draw enough attention from the majority of citizens of our country. We somehow live with bad air, and we just take it for granted as one of the things we have to endure. We don't have to. Where it's become a topical and political hot potato, it's been mainly in the urban centres, and particularly in northern India, where we have the smoggy winter months that make the crisis often acute, and therefore it's often missing the larger point that this crisis is both a perennial issue and a pan-Indian issue. And that's why I'm so glad we have an interesting representation of MPs from across the spectrum. The 2017 State of the Global Air report published by the Health Effects Institute revealed that since 1990, the absolute number of ozone-related deaths in India has risen by a staggering 150%. The economic implications of deteriorating air quality are equally ominous as well. There's a 2013 World Bank study estimating that welfare costs and lost labor income just due to air pollution cost our exchequer 8.5% of India's GDP every year. Labor losses due to air pollution in terms of number of man-days lost, for instance, resulted in a reported loss of $55.5 billion in a single year in India. And further premature deaths cost the country another $505 billion, or 7.6% of our country's GDP. And you know, we know all of this. In fact, is that Rajiv Shukla there? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't acknowledge you because I'm afraid I need glasses to see at the back. Good to see you, Rajiv. It suddenly struck me we had one more MP here. I haven't acknowledged. Glad to have you here too. So a diplomat friend of mine, returning home after less than 3 years service in India, was asked at his exit medical examination by his country's medical service how many packs of cigarettes he smoked a day. When he protested that he was a staunch non-smoker all his life, the doctor commented that x-rays of his lungs showed otherwise. But my poor friend had never lit up. All he had done, poor soul, was to breathe Delhi's air for 3 smoggy winters in a row. That's how bad the crisis is in our city. It really is that bad. The New York Times former Indian correspondent Gardner Harris, in a famous article in 2015, explained that he was leaving his post prematurely because merely living in Delhi was destroying his children's health. Describing the asthmatic travails of his 8-year-old son, Harris wrote that Delhi was, and I quote, suffering from a dire pediatric respiratory crisis, with a recent study showing that nearly half of the city's 4.4 million school children have irreversible lung damage from the poisonous air, unquote. Harris felt that he and other expatriates were, quote, pursuing our careers at our children's expense, and concluded that it was, and I quote again, unethical for those who have a choice to willingly raise children here, unquote. This seems like extreme language, but we have to hear this. He picked up his kids and left India. But we Indians don't have that choice. This is our country, we live here, we have to fix our air. There's a study, I see a couple of MPs after all here from Bengal, a study conducted by the Kolkata-based Chittaranjan National Cancer Institute. They studied school children in Delhi between 4 and 17 years of age and found that all their key indicators of respiratory health and lung function were markedly worse than their counterparts anywhere else in the world. Indeed, the figures were 2 to 4 times as bad for children in Delhi than in other places in India and were not reversible. So we're doing permanent damage to our children. In other words, toxic air quality is a silent killer, and today in India, the air we breathe has itself become a public health crisis, one that is slowly but surely crippling our country. And as Sunjoy Joshi reminded us, 6 of the world's 10 most polluted cities are in India. That's really a shaming statistic. Now, the issue of air quality is politically similar to concerns surrounding our foreign policy. I've previously remarked, I'm sure Anand Sharma ji will agree with me, that there is no BJP or Congress foreign policy, there's only an Indian foreign policy. So too with air quality. Our political differences on the subject must end. At the very beginning, of the stratosphere. There is only an Indian air quality, and the same air is breathed by the BJP and the Congress and all other parties, many of which are here today. Little has been done by the government of India, sadly, yet to address the spreading toxicity. And we must get over our divisions and make this a collective joint effort. It is a problem that can be addressed if the right kind of sustained campaign, one that focuses on practical long-term and short-term interventions to address the issue, is realized. Take, for example, China's action on air quality. I mean, I have stayed in China, in Beijing, in hotel rooms where you could literally not see out of your window because the next building was closer than those cameras at the back of the room, but the air was so bad you could not see the wall or the windows of that next building. That's how bad Beijing was. Today, it is literally 100 times better. At the peak of its toxicity in air and with public scrutiny coming up with the Beijing Olympics, China formulated a national air pollution action plan. They imposed stringent controls on emissions, strict guidelines for air quality checks, and their air quality strategy, though arguably they still have some way to go, has actually made a lot of difference, visible difference already. And it demonstrates to us that the fight for improved air quality is not a lost cause, it's not an insurmountable challenge. If they can do it, and they're even more populous than us, we can do it too. At the same time, of course, we have to recognize we're not China. We are, after all, a democracy. The smallest voice matters. The means are just as important as the ends. And that's an underlying commitment that we must take everyone along in our journey. And I think Anand Sharma made that point. We need to engage the elected representatives of the people. This is a popular cause that engages everyone in our democracy. And that's one of the reasons I'm so happy that so many MPs have chosen to attend. While India has officially shown considerable commitment and willingness to address the issue in theory, there's even officially a national clean air program. Then in the world stage, they signed the Copenhagen Agreement, the Paris Agreement more recently. But given the magnitude of the concern we have before us, the pace of action in protecting the environment is found wanting. What then must be the principal guiding lights of the action plan that we should want to see in India? First, I'm sure Anandji will agree with me here, we must be ambitious. As bring in the best of tech-based innovation and interventions, wedded with our age-old heritage of sustainable practice and conservation that has served India well in the past. We need to accept that our present infrastructure is insufficient to even monitor the scale of toxicity in air quality across the country, particularly in rural India, where the chulha, the wood stove, the coal stove, continues to burn out the lungs of citizens who have absolutely no affordable alternatives. Second, the plan must not just be ambitious, it must be courageous. Courageous in its guidelines, it must propose tough deadlines and targets that the nation must strive together to achieve. No longer can we be complacent about timelines. That's really been a problem in our country, particularly in the industrial clusters, because we need their cooperation, compliance, and they tend to put everything off for later. At the same time, the proposals of our action plan cannot and must not further weaken the weakest amongst our society. We talk about farmers, this whole business of stubble burning. We've already heard this issue is a genuine problem for the national capital region. But at the same time, for a poor farmer, stubble burning is a cost-saving practice. So we need to present those farmers with a viable, cost-saving alternative that they can afford to undertake, and then they will save our air. These are challenges we must recognize and negotiate in a diverse democracy such as ours. And third and final, the most important perhaps, is that our action plan must be collaborative. It must bring together the brightest minds from our envy-inducing country, cutting-edge civil and technical resources that we have in this country, the vast knowledge pool that we're fortunate to be blessed with. We need to put everyone on board. I've often met individuals from organizations working in this field only to hear their frustration in getting an audience with members of our country's executive and legislature. That needs to change. And ultimately, that's been the singular engine behind this roundtable consultation, which I hope ORF will continue to help us push forward. This is a platform that can help build and strengthen some of those bridges. If we can get the stakeholders, the experts, we have one more MP joining us, and Sheikh Mohammed Salim, there's a seat here, Mohammed, come. Now, the realist in me understands that we will not be able to change the situation in a year or two, perhaps not even in 5 or 10, by which time we could have seen multiple shifts in the ruling dispensation of the day. But as a cautious optimist, I strongly believe that perhaps in that decade we're talking about, things can change if and only if we sow the seeds now. If we want to clear the toxicity from our air 10 years from now, we need to start today. As I've long argued, we only need to look at our past for all the inspiration and encouragement we need in this fight. Today, for example, it's easy to forget that by 1940, after nearly 2 centuries of the Raj, Britain accounted for nearly 10% of the world's GDP, while India had been reduced to a poor poster child for underdevelopment and poverty. But rather than melt down into chaos and indisposition, our government of that day and the governments to follow set aside their differences, rallied the political class together, and in alliance with the best of civil society and grassroots pioneers of change, the government waged successive and indeed successful campaigns against poverty, against pestilence, famine, anarchy, patriarchy. We may still have miles to go before we sleep, as our former Prime Minister, our first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru said, but we also know that it can be done. Think of where we came from. We went from 17% literacy in 1947 to 79% today. We went from 90% below the poverty line to under 20% today. We went from infant mortality, child mortality, maternal health. We have not achieved perfection, but we have made extraordinary progress. And that's what should inspire us. We can do it again. And we can do it in this intractable area as well. So over today and tomorrow, I cannot promise that we'll have all the conversations that we want to have, nor is it likely that we'll raise all the aspects of a problem like this with the complexity and the magnitude of air pollution, but with the passion and the intensity that I'm sure is present in all of you. And arguably with a little bit of luck as well, perhaps at the conclusion of this roundtable, together we can take, or we will have taken important steps to figure out how best as a collaborative partnership we can give this issue the sustained intervention it requires. Since my time is almost up and all of you are eager to meet each other, I'm sure, let me swiftly conclude on a note of hope and a call to action. In a country as diverse and stratified as ours, the crisis we are required to address daily, in fact, the crises we are required to address are very many. Our choice of problems and development concerns mean that everyone has different priorities. Some will take priority over others, but ultimately we must recognize that the crisis of toxic air quality affects us all, no matter which part of the country we come from, what political and ideological affiliations we may have, what socioeconomic class we find ourselves in, and indeed, even what time of year it may be. Honestly, we all breathe the same air, and it's the same bad air pretty much everywhere. With its cross-sectoral implications, public health dimensions, and the impact on the economy and the engine of that economy, the workforce of today's India, solving this air quality crisis may well prove to be the single most important moonshot of this generation. I hope and express the confidence that if we can get these ideas moving, get them to implementation, that we may all see cleaner and bluer skies in our lifetimes. Thank you all, and Jai Hind.